Well, hello. We should now be live if everything is set up okay. And back for the second of these series of live streams, which I think I've now landed on calling 24 hours 2, which 24 hours before most Chesterfield games. We're going to try and have a sit down and recap what's happening with the Spirites at the moment, what to look forward to ahead of the upcoming game, and a few kind of tactical things and things like that. As well, we did a trial run for this for the opening game against Barrow a couple of weeks ago now, and we had some great engagement on that, particularly after the fact. And I think that's what's nice about doing this style of content is, yes, if you can catch it live, then that's fine. But if not, then it doesn't really affect the viewing experience to kind of watch it back in the build up to the game, or even in the aftermath of the game, to see kind of what things did play out the way we kind of predicted. On here. Now, as said, it has been a 2-week break, so we have unfortunately missed a couple of games, kind of pre-game live streams for those games, starting with a trip to Cheltenham Town, which did a 2-0 win for Chesterfield. Now, the reason there wasn't anything there is because I actually had a bit of an extended weekend down in Cheltenham, which is very, very nice, but it did mean I wasn't available on the Friday. And I do kind of want to keep these kind of on the Friday, or as close to possible to that 24-hour mark, just because I think it's a nice point in the build-up to have the full picture in terms of how things are looking, in terms of injuries, potential last-minute signings, and things like that as well. So that's kind of the theory there. But yes, it was a very nice trip to Cheltenham. What wasn't so nice, however, was what followed, which was a 2-0 defeat for Chesterfield in the EFL Cup, but most importantly to Mansfield Town, which of course is the big derby for Chesterfield. It hadn't been played for many years. That most recent game in 2018 was a bit of a tough one for Chesterfield. So I think there was a real appetite to go and get some revenge, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. Chesterfield out of the EFL Cup at the first round stage. And if you've been following my work elsewhere, kind of just to do some final bits of admin before we move into the live stream proper, all links to my socials will be down in the description, which is particularly notable here because if you have been following over on Medium and kind of posted elsewhere to Twitter and Blue Sky and places like that, you will see we've done some post-game pieces as well, not live streams, but written pieces under the title of The Debrief. There's a couple of those out already. And unfortunately, just due to the kind of Saturday, Tuesday rhythm and things being a bit of a quick turnaround for Chesterfield at the moment, and they've got another week of that coming up, we didn't have time to do one of those debrief pieces for this Mansfield Town game. So, as an apology and to get some of those final thoughts out there, I thought what we could do before we move into the pre-Bristol Rovers chat is take kind of a reflection on that Mansfield Town game, and it does kind of help to kind of identify where we are heading into what is another big game coming up against Saturday. Of course, Bristol Rovers, tough start to the season, but they were amongst many people's favourites, as were Chesterfield, to be challenging for promotion. A big game, probably why Sky have picked it for the 12:30 kickoff, which is why we're also here a little bit earlier for this live stream as well. So I'm going to add now a few things from this Mansfield Town game. And before we go any further, just one final bit of admin. You will see that we moved over to a slightly different tactics board. Now, this was launched, I think it might have even been on the day of the Barrow stream, or very close. I just didn't have time to really dive into it and look how things were going. But James Alcott, who is a fantastic YouTuber and analyst, and if you follow any sort of football content, particularly that in the Premier League, etc., you're probably well aware of who James Alcott is. He has launched his own kind of tactics board, and comes with kind of a media draw setting in it as well. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. Now, this is not an advertisement in any way, not being paid or incentivized to say this, other than the fact that I've used it and it's absolutely superb. And I have dropped the link down when James launched this. He did just say for people that use it, if they could just kind of signpost it and drop the link in the description. I'm absolutely willing to do that because I think it is fantastic. There are some paid options. I'm on one of, just for full disclosure, I am on one of the cheap ones for that. But you can also use it for free. So if you just want to go in and play around with it, that's fine. But people like me who use it a little bit more often for content and things like that, it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, the link to that is down in the description. But after nearly 5 and a bit minutes of admin, we can settle in to some analysis. I think the one thing that was interesting, of course, a defeat for Chesterfield, but they were pretty good in the first half and really were very unfortunate to be losing at halftime. Then, of course, kind of gifted a goal away early on in the second half, and that was that. But rather than discuss the goals conceded and the manner of them, which I think particularly the second one was a little bit disappointing, I thought, let's take one of the positives from this game. It was a tough night for Chesterfield, a tough result in a big game. But what positives can we take from it? I think the positives are how many chances they created in the first half. So when I was having a look back over the highlights, one of the things I kind of wanted to establish was, well, how did they do that? I think one of the things you could see, even watching the game live, was that Mansfield were being pulled around by Chesterfield quite a lot. And I think that had to do with how Mansfield set up their defensive setup. Because as you look through the couple of examples we're going to look at here, it did look like they went for quite a man kind of orientated kind of press or block, rather than kind of sitting zonally and looking to protect space. They were quite proactive in kind of chasing Chesterfield's players and following them around the pitch. And that's great. There's nothing against that at all. That's not a criticism of Nigel Clough at all. It's a way a lot of managers, particularly in the modern game, like to play, get pressure on players, stop them playing, win the ball back, and play the game your own way. However, if you're not successful in winning the ball, it does create a lot of space for the opposition to play into. And I think that's exactly what we saw from a Chesterfield point of view as they were able to play around. So this first example here, hopefully that's displaying okay for you. If there's anybody in the chat, feel free to say, like I say, still kind of learning how things work with this streaming, and particularly, of course, using the slightly different tactics board to present things today. But you can see here, Jordan Bowery, he was playing in defence. Obviously, Chesterfield fans will know him best as a striker from when he came through there. Of course, one of well, I say rare players to play on both sides. There are actually 3 players in this game. Well, there could have been 4. Of course, Louis Reed on the books at Mansfield Town did not play. But Jordan Bowery for Mansfield has played for Chesterfield, and Tom Nail and Ryan Stirk for Chesterfield have played for Mansfield. So maybe not quite as rare as you might think for such a fierce derby. But either way, people will know Jordan Bowery most commonly from a Chesterfield point of view as a striker. But in the past few years, he has kind of settled into playing defence. He played kind of both, really. He played at right back, at centre back, and up front in this game for Mansfield. But this is the portion of the game where he's playing in defence. And you can see here from these arrows, you can see almost the kind of man kind of responsibilities for Mansfield. And, Barry has stepped out of the defence. He's followed Armando Dobra quite high up the pitch. And then, of course, you've got player here quite close on Ryan Stirk. This player keeping an eye on Matt Dibley-Diaz. I think it's still Rhys Oates, obviously did go off midway through the first half for Will Evans. And I think he has done by the time we look at the second example. But here it's Rhys Oates that's dropped back to track the fullback Lewis Gordon. As you can see, these players trying to keep a relatively close eye on one particular player. But because Chesterfield are shifting, because Barry's had to follow Dobra out, that then creates an interesting point for Mansfield, because then Darcy kind of drifts into this left-hand space that Dobra's vacated by dropping deep. And that creates a question for Mansfield in terms of who is going to follow Ronan Darcy out into this space. And this is the thing that I'm getting at here with how Chesterfield were able to manipulate Mansfield's kind of press and block in that first half. Is there was a lot of rotation, a lot of shifting, and Mansfield just didn't seem exactly sure how to deal with that. They weren't necessarily 100% confident in their man-to-man responsibilities. And you can see the example here is that 2 players here followed Ronan Darcy out. Doesn't seem like they're particularly sure which one should stay, which one should go. And that opens up a big chunk of space as kind of signaled by the blue circle there, which is then the point. I've not got the video, this is just a screenshot, but that's then the point that Chesterfield play into. Will Grigg then comes across, drops into that space, holds the ball up for Dobra, then gets in the box and gets the shot off. Well saved by Liam Roberts, which was something that was said many, many times throughout that first half. He had a fantastic half, Liam Roberts, in the Mansfield goal. I think he was awarded man of the match by their supporters, and absolutely deservedly so. Kept them in the game, gave them the platform to then go on and get that second goal. Then managed, to their credit, the second half quite well. We'll talk about the second half a little bit more a little bit later. So that's the first example. And now we go on to the second example, which almost is the opposite problem for Mansfield, in that you've got Dobra and Darcy again, almost drifting both out to the left-hand side, putting a bit more pressure on the area of pitch and asking Mansfield again, how are you going to deal with this in terms of who's going to follow? And as you can see, I realise now that white circle might almost be obscuring Dobra and Darcy, but as you can see, there are other players in the vicinity, but the midfield there, I think it might be George Maris, not 100% sure, obviously with his back to it on this screen. And then you've got Bowery again, keeping an eye on Dobra. And I think you can see here Will Evans, from his body position, he realises that there might be a problem here because he's starting to backtrack. Of course, his primary goal, as it was with Oates, who he then replaced, is to keep an eye on Gordon, but he is looking backwards. I think he realises there might be a problem here because Maris is looking infield. He's looking towards where Markande is, and there's 2 players to deal with, and only Bowery there to deal with it. So Evans does recognise this, but it's too late. And as you can see, as I'll just delete these first couple of screenshots, as you can see here, the problem has already kind of materialized. And then again, the same issue as there was with the first example, really, both Maris and Barry deciding to go out and jump on Dobra rather than one staying and one going and protecting the space. Markande sees that, slips Darcy in behind. Evans has tracked that run back, but he can't get back quickly enough. And this was the big chance, I think, for Chesterfield. This was the big one. There were other ones too. The Dobra one, particularly the one that we covered in the first screenshot, was good. He had a couple. Shea Dunkley had a header saved by Roberts. But this, I think, was the real chance. There's a lot of space for Darcy. He's in a good position. He gets into space well. He had a brilliant half, to be fair to him, and a solid game, particularly for what was his home debut and his first start for Chesterfield since moving on loan from Wigan Athletic. But I think this was the big chance. And if Chesterfield had scored this, it could have been completely different because we didn't quite see these same spaces opening up for Chesterfield in the second half. Now, the reason I didn't end up doing a full debrief piece on this was, one, due to time constraints, and two, because I did want to kind of delve deep into what kind of changes Mansfield made. Of course, they made a personnel change. They put Bowery up from, took Don Dwyer off and brought on another centre-back, or another defender at least. But I couldn't, unfortunately, there wasn't really enough of a sample in the extended highlights or whatever to have a look at how Mansfield altered and have a proper deep dive into that. So that's why there was no full written piece, but I didn't think it was worth having a look at here, because this, in the first half, with the first example we looked at, which unfortunately now I can't go back to because I had to delete it to move through this screenshot. And then this second one with how they've pulled Mansfield out, with how they're not 100% sure who's supposed to be tracking who in this almost kind of man-intense system, and how Darcy is able to get into behind. But Mansfield were able to manage that a lot better in the second half. Chesterfield weren't able to create quite as much, and of course that they gave the goals away. So what are the takeaways from this from Chesterfield? And in a lot of senses, it's keep doing what you're doing, but just do it better, I think, is the big takeaway from this. Chesterfield were impressive in that first half. They created a lot of chances. They played as you would want them to play. But again, it's just kind of optimizing things in both boxes, avoiding those kind of silly mistakes or switch-offs, or however you might want to term it, that kind of acts as a big pressure reliever. When you're dominating the ball, when you're creating these chances, the worst thing you can do is then give something up at the other end, because it creates more confidence in the away side. It acts as that kind of, as I say, a bit of a pressure reliever and gives them the something to hold on to and truly bunkering. I think that was part of what we saw in the second half as well, because there was no great incentive for Mansfield to come out and chase the ball as they had in sections of the first half, because they were 1 and then 2-0 up. Whereas if Chesterfield had taken one of these chances or a couple of these chances and got in front, I think there's a lot more incentive for Nigel Clough to tell his team to keep pressing the ball, because they took the lead so early and then faced an absolute barrage. And if Chesterfield had scored, even if it was only one, even if it was still 1-1, I think there'd be more pressure with the home crowd. They'd lost their first couple of league games, Mansfield, in League One. There was real pressure on them to get a result here. Not saying there wasn't pressure on Chesterfield too, but particularly Mansfield having had a rough start to the season, there was real pressure to win this game and have that act as a springboard. I don't think fans would have responded very well if they decided, had it gone to 1-1, to then bunker in the second half. I think that would have given Chesterfield more confidence, because they'd been forcing Mansfield back, and it would have created a bit more of a hostile atmosphere. But it didn't happen. Mansfield was still in the lead, and then they got another one that was kind of almost gifted to them in a way. Some good pressing work, it has to be said, from Mansfield, but poor from Chesterfield in a playing out from the back sense. And then that really gave them that license and freedom to drop off a little bit, to be more defensive. Unfortunately, though, as I say, couldn't really delve into that too deeply, because there weren't a great deal of highlight kind of sample size in the extended highlights for the second half. But those are the closing thoughts there for Chesterfield. I think a tough night, but on the whole, there were some positive signs, and just getting things a little bit better in both boxes, taking their chances and preventing the silly errors at the back. And 9 times out of 10, you could win a game that follows this sort of flow, which could be encouraging, because having spoken at reasonable length there about that Mansfield game, let's now turn our attention to this upcoming game against Bristol Rovers. Because having spoken about all of that in the context of the Mansfield game, there's some things that look pretty familiar here. When you look at Bristol Rovers, and this is their most recent league game against Fleetwood. We'll look at their Carabao Cup exit. They also lost, I think they also lost 2-0, if memory serves, against Cambridge United. But you can see Bristol Rovers almost suffering from the same kind of problems that Mansfield were, in that they're kind of pressing out, trying to apply pressure, follow men up the pitch where the defenders are concerned, but not quite getting it right. And that's created a lot of space for Fleetwood to play through. And you can see the example here. The left-sided centre-back has followed one. Fleetwood playing with a front two in this game has followed one of the strikers deeper in field. If I just get this small arrow there, that has then created some space in that kind of left-hand side of the pitch, which Elliot Bonds, the Fleetwood midfielder, has noticed. He's drifted out. Nobody has really tracked that run. He's got a lot of space now to receive the ball. And as you can see, it's just a lot of Bristol Rovers trying to always chase the ball and almost over-chasing it. That's created a lot of space. So what ultimately ends up happening in this sequence is that because they've dragged these players out, because there's nobody to then stop this ball across, the number 9 here, Will Davis, I believe it is, makes the run in behind and scores for Fleetwood Town. So Bristol Rovers, there might be scenarios where Chesterfield can almost manipulate Bristol Rovers' press and block, etc., however you want to term it, in the same way that they did with Mansfield. And if they can take their chances in this instance, then they could be on to a winner and a more positive result this time around. And just to kind of prove really that this wasn't a fluke, not an absolutely identical scenario, as I just clear these drawings here. But again, you can see that the back three for Bristol Rovers is really unsettled now. It's interesting that both of these scenarios actually came from Bristol Rovers having, I think one was a goal kick or one was a free kick, or anyway, the goalkeeper kicking it long in any case, exactly here. What the context was, I can't 100% remember. But the goalkeeper kicking it long, Bristol Rovers not winning that first ball. And then because they brought all these players up here, as you can see, quite a few players forward. Should probably make that blue, actually. There we go. Quite a few players forward to contest that initial ball. When it then goes back the other way, the back three is unsettled. They're having to push forward. They're having to try and prevent Fleetwood from playing, but they can't do it. And again, there's not sufficient numbers back, and Evans is able to just not Evans, rather getting or is it whatever the Fleetwood striker, should I say, peels off and is able to get behind and score, as he did quite similarly to the first goal. So I suppose the takeaways from this is we just look at one final example, and this is probably the most severe, really. Bristol Rovers lose the ball in midfield. That back three again is retreating. It's not settled. It's exposed. And Cambridge have got a 4-on-3. And again, they're just able to slip the ball through to this man running here and get a goal. So I suppose what I'm saying is similarly to the Mansfield game, really, unless Bristol Rovers do intend to switch things up. Obviously, they've had a bit of a difficult start to the season, 3 defeats in all competitions. They have points in those games when they've gone behind, also switched from a back 3 to a back 4. So that's something they contemplate doing from the start against Chesterfield. I suppose we'll have to wait and see whether they do ought to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to committing players forward. We'll have to wait and see, as teams often tend to do when they come to the SMH Group Stadium. Darrell Clark, Bristol Rovers manager, saying that he expects Chesterfield to be in the top 7. So again, Chesterfield, the kind of impression is of Chesterfield that it's a tough place to go, and it is a tough place to go. So we do often see teams kind of mix things up a little bit when it comes to playing Chesterfield. We've already seen that a couple of instances already this season. But taking things of what we've seen so far from Bristol Rovers, there does seem the capability to get at this back three if you can play quickly, and again, kind of try and pull players around, and then kind of take advantage of the space that is then created, similarly to how they did against Mansfield Town. But the key this time is take the chances that arrive. But yes, I think I'm stuck on this. I think I might have misidentified Fleetwood striker. I'm thinking about anyway. I'm not gonna gloss kind of spend too much time on that as we just move away from that for just a second. As I now move over, as we've had a look at the kind of analysis segment of this, now going to move into what Chesterfield might look to do with all that in mind, as I just switch over from one part of this to the other. There we go. That should now be working, and it is. Fantastic. So, as we can see now, we've got the starting 11 from that cup defeat against Mansfield. So what will the plan be? Will there be any changes for Chesterfield? Well, one that we can be pretty sure on is that Mad Diaz will not play. Really, really unfortunate for him. Started the game well. Yes, there's maybe a bit of a question. Could he have tracked his man a little bit better in the first goal? But it just seemed like there was a little bit of a miscommunication on the handover between Sturk, because Sturk had tracked Oates' run in field. Looked like Dibley Diaz could then have almost taken over that responsibility as he moved further in field, but it just didn't quite happen. All the players, along with Cal McFadden, kind of got sucked to the ball, which then allowed Oates to run through. But other than that, Dibley Diaz was very, very impressive, having had a little bit of an injury in pre-season and had his injury problems at Northampton Town. Unfortunately, that ankle problem is causing him a little bit more of an issue again, and by all accounts, he will not be available for selection for this game against Barrow. So you would imagine that would mean Tom Naylor will come back in. He came on for Dibley Diaz in the first half of that Mansfield game, and you would imagine that is the sensible change there. It could have also maybe been John Fleck as well, but again, he's still coming back from a knock, so you wonder whether he could come onto the bench for this. So you'd imagine that the most like-for-like change there is Naylor coming in for Dibley Diaz. Now, in terms of any other changes, I do wonder whether we could see Lee Bonis and Dylan Duffy coming back in for this one, just because Danny Webb spoke about in the build-up to that Cheltenham game about how the plan had been to try and almost exploit the channels to turn Cheltenham around, to get playing quickly. And as we spoke about there, Bristol Rovers, if you can take advantage of their wing-backs getting high, of course, one of those wing-backs being Jack Sparks, who had a loan spell at Chesterfield last season. So I think one of the big keys from a defensive point of view for Chesterfield will be winning will be winning that battle and stopping him from being able to whip crosses in, because he did that a lot for Chesterfield in an albeit shortened sample size, again due to injury, where it seemed to ultimately so much through last season. But even in the highlights, yes, Bristol Rovers have struggled, but that has been one area where Sparks has been a little bit of a standout. He has been able to get some good balls into the box. But as we say, Bristol Rovers are playing with those very aggressive wing backs. So is there a chance for kind of Duffy and Bonis, as they did in that Cheltenham game, to try and almost exploit that space, to work those channels and bring Chesterfield up the pitch? Now, if that is the case, of course, they were both had a little bit of a rest, of course. Both came on in that Mansfield game, but didn't play at the full 90, so should be relatively rested. Now, if they were to come in, you would imagine that for Lee Bonis, that's quite simple. It will just be for Will Grigg. Then if you were to bring Duffy in, I think there is a real question here, because Ronan Darcy was one of the standout players, as we say. Probably should have scored with the chance he had, but was very good at taking up those positions of pulling the Mansfield defence around. Who does Duffy come in for? And if he does come in, where does he then play? Because as we've identified kind of throughout pre-season, the start this season, he has been playing kind of in that almost like second striker role off Will Grigg or Lee Bonis. So if he was to come back in, would it be for Ronan Darcy? Would he just occupy that role here? Or could you maybe keep Darcy in, because he was so impressive in that first start against Mansfield, and maybe give Dobra or Markande a game off this time? And if you did do that, would it be played that way, which would be the logical way you would think, with Duffy playing kind of in the wider left position and Darcy in the 10? Or because you want Duffy to almost run the channels and then get wide, could you almost play Darcy in his left-hand half space here with Markande on the right? And then Duffy and Bonis, almost as we've seen, particularly at Cheltenham, almost operating as a little bit like a front two. That would be the big question for me in that context. But I think that might be what we see, just because of what Danny Webb said about how they approached that Cheltenham game, and then what the plan was, what the plan potentially could be, at least against Bristol Rovers, to almost attack that. What has been in the early stage of the season a vulnerable back three, and get these two players out into the channels and running and pulling that back three apart. Could that then be the play? Could they be the two better players or players best suited for that role? I suppose we'll have to wait and see on that, but I think that is just about everything I wanted to cover. So just as one final roundup, what are the keys for Chesterfield coming into this game? I think first things first, taking your chances when you're on top, because chances are likely to come like Mansfield, Bristol Rovers are a team that are probably going to come on to Chesterfield a little bit more. It should be a bit more of an even game and an opportunity to play into that space, to pull the defence around and create some chances. So when those chances come, they have to be taken, because if you dominate possession, dominate shots, it counts for nothing if you can't take your chances. From a defensive point of view, I think that, again, it'll be the role of Dunkley McFadden to win the battle, whether it's with Promise Omachire or Ellis Harrison, whoever Bristol Rovers decide to start up top. It'll be their job to win the ball back, to win those aerial duels, get Chesterfield going again quickly, and get them able to play in this space. And also a big one for Lewis Gordon and Vontae Daly-Campbell as well, to make sure they're tracking the runs of those wing-backs. That's where the wide threat is going to come for Bristol Rovers. So making sure that they are sensible with their positioning, capable of dealing with that, stopping the crosses, particularly coming in from Sparks, who Chesterfield are familiar with, out in that left wing-back role. And as we say, winning the ball back, winning those duels, allowing Sturkin-Naylor to get you playing forward, and then looking to attack Bristol Rovers' back three. If indeed it is, as we say, they have experimented with switching to a 4-2-3-1 at times, so we'll have to wait and see what they do. And of course, as we say, because they've had a bit of a rough start, there is the scope there for them to experiment a little bit. But that is about it. So that's I'm not going to look at it as a firm predicted 11, but just an educated guess, shall we say, of the same back five, really. Naylor coming back in for Dibley Diaz, and then Bonus coming in for Grigg, and then Duffy coming in for one of Darcy or Dobry. It could well be Ronan Darcy, and just reverting back to the 11 that played at Cheltenham Town. Or we could see maybe something a little bit different with Darcy being so impressive in his home debut. But yes, that is it. I think just clocking in at just under half an hour, that's probably going to be about the rough length for these live streams. If you have enjoyed it, thank you very, very much for tuning in. It is massively, massively appreciated. It's still a little bit of a work in progress in terms of the format and presenting live. It's something that's a little bit new to myself. So hopefully you've enjoyed it in any case. And of course, any feedback would be massively, massively appreciated. And you can drop that either in the live chat as we close, or this will be available to watch back in its entirety as a video in the aftermath. So any kind of feedback in the comments there would be massively welcomed as well. In terms of the next game coming up, Gillingham, that might be a little bit different. It might not be the kind of 24 hours before the kickoff, but we'll look to do something in the build-up to that game, and then should be back into the flow for the Harrogate Town game the following Saturday. But anyway, that is enough. Taking up of your time. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. As I say, if you have enjoyed it, please like, subscription, shares are all massively, massively appreciated. And I'll hopefully see you in the next one, which should be very soon. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.